Hello and good morning friends, welcome to the CEC-UGC live lecture. Dear friends, we are pleased to announce that very successfully we are running a series on microeconomics, and so far we have conducted numerous lectures under this series, and we believe that you might be liking all the lectures which have been delivered for you in the past. All the lectures are uploaded for you on YouTube. Dear friends, taking the series forward, that is on microeconomics, today we would be talking on two topics. In the first session, we would be discussing on breakup of price effect into income effect and substitution effect. Whereas in the second session, we would be discussing on consumer surplus. And for this very discussion, we have once again with us in our studios, Dr. Kamlesh Gakkar. Dr. Gakkar is a professor in economics in Institute of Management and Research, Maharishi Dayanand University, Rohtak. Dear friends, we would like to tell you all that Dr. Gakkar is a gold medalist in BA Honours and MA Economics from Punjab University. She has almost 36 years of teaching experience. Many of her publications are there which if you want to read out are there for you, and I would like to tell you all that many of her students are doing PhD under her guidance. So dear friends, let's take advantages from her experiences, and first of all I would like to welcome our guest Dr. Kamlesh Gakkar. Dr. Gakkar, welcome to the EduSet lecture.
Thank you, Geetika. Dear viewers, today I am going to tell you about breakup of price effect into income effect and substitution effect. You know that as the price of a commodity falls, the consumer buys more of the commodity, but actually it is the result of two forces. They are income effect and substitution effect. So we should know what is income effect and what is substitution effect. When the price of a commodity falls, in order to buy the same amount of the commodity, now the consumer needs less of the money income and some extra income is left with him, and this is known as increase in real income. With this real income, he can buy more of the commodity. So that will be the income effect. And you can say that income effect measures the increase in quantity purchased of a thing resulting only from the increase in real income that accompanies a price decline. The second effect is the substitution effect. And what is that? You know, as the price of a commodity falls, it becomes cheaper as compared to the other commodity, and cheaper commodity is always substituted for the costlier one. So this also raises the demand for the commodity, and this is known as the substitution effect. So we can say that substitution effect measures the increase in quantity demanded of a thing when its price falls, resulting only from relative price decline and is independent of the change in real income. You can know from the example also. Supposing a person is buying juice bottles and cold drinks. Price of juice bottle is rupees 15 per bottle and price of cold drinks is supposing rupees 10. The consumer buys 10 bottles of juice and 10 bottles of cold drinks. So he spends rupees 150 on juice. Now supposing the price of juice bottle falls to rupees 10, then what would happen? Now he needs only 100 rupees to buy the same juice, and now he is having 50 rupees extra with him. This is increase in real income. With this he can buy 5 more bottles of juice. So this will be known as income effect, and he can now substitute juice for the cold drinks. So he buys more juice bottles in place of cold drinks also. Supposing he buys 6 or 5 bottles of juice more as compared to earlier, which is only because he is now substituting it for the cold drinks. So his demand has increased because of the substitution. This is substitution effect. So on one hand, he has increased the demand because of increased income, and on the other hand, he has increased the demand because it is being substituted for the cold drinks. So we can say that price effect is actually the combination of income effect and substitution effect. Now, how to decompose this price effect into income effect and substitution effect? There are two approaches. One is Hicksian approach, other is the Slutsky approach. We know that real income of the consumer rises with fall in price of the commodity. So in order to find out the substitution effect, in Hicksian method, income of the consumer is to be reduced in such a manner so that his satisfaction remains the same. He remains on the same indifference curve, but his equilibrium position is changed, and we know that now he is buying more of the commodity. No doubt his real income is constant. So that will be the substitution effect, and the amount by which the income is reduced to compensate the consumer for fall in income is known as compensating variation. And the other approach is Slutsky's method, in which income is adjusted in such a manner so that the consumer can buy only the combination which he was buying before the fall in price. So we take away the extra income from him, but still he buys more of the commodity and he reaches on a new indifference curve. So that effect will be known as substitution effect, because we have taken the increase in real income away from him, and what income is taken away from him is known as the cost difference, and this difference is calculated by the change in the cost of purchase of the product at the new price and the cost of purchase of the product at the earlier price. In both ways we can find out what is the substitution effect and what is the income effect, and we will be doing this one by one. So firstly we show the breakup of price effect into income effect and substitution effect in case of a normal commodity through the method of compensating variation, and this we have shown in figure 1. You can see in this diagram that LM is the first price line. We have taken X commodity on X axis and Y commodity on Y axis. When the price line is LM, consumer is on IC1 and equilibrium is at 1, where he is buying OR of the commodity X. Now the price of the commodity X falls and the line LM shifts to LM1, and now the consumer reaches on a higher indifference curve IC2, where the new price line LM1 is tangent to IC2 at equilibrium 2. So we have reached from 1 to 2, and consumer was buying OR of the commodity, now he is buying OS of the commodity. So RS is the price effect. Now we want to know what is the substitution effect and what is the income effect. In case of the normal commodity, both effects are positive. What does this imply? That as the price falls, substitution effect implies that consumer will buy more of it, and income effect is positive. That means that with rise in income, he will buy more of it. Keeping this thing in mind, now what is to be done? We have to take the extra income from the consumer so that he comes down on the earlier indifference curve IC1. So you see, income is decreased by the amount LL1, and this is known as compensating variation. and new line, price line L1 M2 is drawn, which is parallel to LM1, showing that relative prices have changed but real income is constant. Consumer is again on IC1, but now the equilibrium is not on 1, equilibrium is at point 3. Now the consumer reaches from 1 to 3 and this is the substitution effect. He is buying now OT of the commodity. So we see RT is the substitution effect because it is due to the change in only relative prices while the real income remains constant. But if we give back the income to the consumer, he again reaches on IC2 and he reaches on equilibrium number 2. So the movement from 3 to 2 is the income effect, and here we can see that he is now buying OS of the commodity. So TS is the income effect. So what you see in this, that price effect is equal to RS, substitution effect is equal to RT, income effect is equal to TS. So RS is equal to RT plus TS, or you can say price effect is equal to substitution effect plus income effect. Now both these effects are positive, so price effect is quite large in case of a normal commodity. When the price fall, consumer buys more of it. Now we will show the price effect decomposition into income effect and substitution effect in case of a normal commodity by Slutsky's method. Now we can again show this in the form of a figure. It is shown in figure 2. Now look here, X commodity is shown on X axis and Y commodity is shown on Y axis. LM is the first price line and consumer is on IC1 and at equilibrium number 1 where he is buying OR of the commodity X. Due to fall in price of X, LM line shifts to LM1 and consumer reaches on IC2 and the equilibrium position is also at 2 where he is now buying OS of the commodity. So RS is the price effect. Now to find out what is the substitution effect and income effect, income of the consumer is reduced by LL1 so that he can buy the same combination which was at equilibrium 1. So the LM2 price line is passing through equilibrium number 1, but this is not the equilibrium position now because here it is not tangent. So the consumer can move on to IC3 and the equilibrium is on 3 where the real income is kept constant but the relative prices have changed. So consumer moves from 1 to 3. This is the substitution effect and consumer is buying OT of the commodity. So RT is the substitution effect. So if the income which was taken away from the consumer is given back to the consumer, he again reaches on IC2 and which is a higher indifference curve and equilibrium is at 2. He is buying again OS of the commodity. So TS is the income effect. So in this case again you have seen that both effects are positive. Income effect is TS, substitution effect is RT and price effect is equal to RS is equal to RT plus TS. Now we will take the case of an inferior commodity. In case of inferior commodity, what happens? Income effect is negative. That says that with rise in income, buy less of that commodity. But you should remember that substitution effect is always positive, and in the case of inferior commodity, this substitution effect is greater than the income effect. So what happens? As the price falls, demand for the commodity rises. But this rise in demand is less as compared to what was in case of normal commodity, because here both the forces of income effect and substitution effect are working in opposite directions. Now we will show this in the form of a curve and figure number 3. Now what again you see, LM is the first price line and consumer is at equilibrium number 1 on IC1, he is buying OR of the commodity. Now with fall in price, LM line shifts to LM1 and consumer reaches on IC2 and equilibrium is at number 2 where he is buying OS of the commodity. So RS is price effect. Now we would like to see what is the income effect and what is the substitution effect, and we are making use of the Hicksian method of finding out the substitution effect. So income is reduced by LL1 so that consumer comes back on the earlier indifference curve IC1. Here the tangency is at point 3. So the consumer has moved from 1 to 3 and this is the substitution effect. So here substitution effect is RT, it is quite large, and if the income which we have taken away from the consumer is given back to the consumer, he will again be on IC2 and equilibrium will be at 2 and he will buy OS of the commodity. So this means income effect is minus ST. This says buy less of the commodity. So total effect will remain RS. Thus you see price effect is equal to RS while substitution effect is RT and income effect is minus ST. So again here it is a combination of income effect and substitution effect. Now we come to the case of giffen good. In giffen goods case, income effect is negative and it is very large. Substitution effect, I have told you that it is always positive, but here income effect is greater than the substitution effect. So what would happen? If the price of the commodity falls, then consumer buys less of this commodity. Demand also falls. This is we have shown in the figure 4. Now here again we have shown what is the income effect and what is the substitution effect. LM is the first price line and consumer is on IC1, equilibrium is at 1 where he is buying OR of the commodity X. Price of X falls, price line shifts to LM1 and consumer is now on IC2 and equilibrium is at 2 where he is buying less of the commodity. Now the demand has fallen from OR to OS, or you can say price effect is equal to minus RS. Now to find out the substitution effect, we reduce the income of the consumer by LL1 and the new price line L1 M2 is parallel to LM1 and consumer reaches on the earlier indifference curve IC1. No doubt the equilibrium position has changed from 1 to 3, showing that he is now buying more of the commodity as compared to OR, he is buying OT. So RT is the substitution effect, that is positive. And if the income is given back to the consumer, he will be again on IC2 and equilibrium number 2, showing that he is buying OS of the commodity. So here minus ST is the income effect. So you see that substitution effect is RT, income effect is minus ST. So you get the price effect minus RS, that is RT minus ST. So you see here income effect is larger. So that is why as the price falls, demand also falls. Now we will see how we can derive the law of demand with the help of indifference curve analysis. Firstly, we will take the case of a normal commodity and an inferior good. In the upper diagram, we have shown money income on y-axis and X commodity on x-axis, and in the lower diagram, we have taken price of the commodity on y-axis and demand for the commodity on x-axis. In the upper diagram, we have shown the price consumption curve. Three price lines LM, LM1, LM2 are there showing the fall in price, and PCC shows the price effect. Now we talk of the first equilibrium when the price line is LM. Price is OL upon OM, and that is rupees 5, and consumer is buying OR of the commodity. This refers to point A in the lower diagram where price is 5 and demand is ON. When we move on to the equilibrium number 2 on IC2, due to fall in the price of X, what happens? Now price is OL upon OM1, that is price has fallen to rupees 4. Equilibrium is at 2 where the consumer is buying OS of the commodity. Here in the lower diagram, this refers to point B where we have shown price is rupees 4 and demand is ON2. And when the price line is LM2, price is OL upon OM2, that is price rupees 3, and equilibrium is at number 3 where consumer is buying OT of the commodity. And this refers to point C in the lower diagram where we have shown price is equal to 3 and demand is ON. And if we join all these points A, B and C, we get the demand curve. And you see here that demand curve is sloping downward, showing that as the price falls, demand for the commodity rises. So be it a normal commodity or an inferior commodity, as the price falls, demand rises. The difference is only that in case of normal commodity, rise in demand will be greater as compared to the rise in demand in case of inferior commodity. And the reason we have already done that in case of normal commodity, both income effect and substitution effect are positive. So that is why rise in demand is greater. And in case of inferior commodity, income effect is negative, but it is less than the substitution effect. That is why there is a small rise in demand. Otherwise, price demand relationship is of the same direction in both normal and inferior good. Now we move on to the case of a giffen good. A giffen good is that in which as the price falls, demand also falls. And we will show how we can derive the demand curve. In the upper diagram, we have again taken money income on y-axis and X commodity is on x-axis. In the lower diagram, price is shown on y-axis and demand for the commodity is shown on x-axis. In the upper diagram, we have taken the three price lines. First line is LM. As the price falls, it shifts to LM1. With further fall in price, it shifts to LM2. And you can say that first price is OL upon OM is equal to, supposing it is rupees 5, and in the second time price is OL upon OM1, it is rupees 4, and when price is OL upon OM2, this is equal to 3. So price is falling, and consumer's equilibrium is at 1 on IC1 where the consumer is buying OR of the commodity. When the price is rupees 5, he is buying ON1 of the commodity. In the lower diagram, we have taken from the equilibrium 1 and we draw this point A. And then when we move on to the equilibrium number 2, due to fall in the price of X, what we see? Consumer is buying less OS of the commodity. And this equilibrium 2 is shown as point B on the lower diagram. Here we have shown the price to be rupees 4 and demand has come down from ON1 to ON2. So this is shown by point B, and when they further fall in prices there, we have equilibrium on LM2 price line and IC3 is there. Consumer has reached on the higher indifference curve, satisfaction has increased and equilibrium is at 3, showing that consumer buys OT of the commodity which is less than OS and OR. And equilibrium number 3, from equilibrium number 3 we come to the point C, where we show price is rupees 3 and demand has come down to ON3, and by joining these points A, B, C, we get the rising demand curve. So what you find that this has been able to prove the law of demand does not hold for given goods. What happens in this case? That as the price falls, demand also falls, or you can say कि as the price rises, demand also increases in this case. So indifference curve analysis could explain why there is a rise in demand for a given good with rise in price and why there is a fall in demand with fall in price, because it is due to the result of income effect and substitution effect. In case of given good, I have already told you that income effect is negative and that is very, very large, and substitution effect is positive but it is small. So naturally the result will be the impact of the income effect. So that is why in case of given goods, as the price falls, demand also falls, and as the price rises, demand also rises, and we get an upward sloping demand curve. So dear students, now you must have understood that why when there is a change in price, demand rises or falls, and what is the income effect and what is the substitution effect, and how we can find out whether what would happen if there is inferior commodity or if it is a given commodity, because now we know that income effect is negative or positive, and accordingly we will get whether it is a inferior commodity or whether it is a given good. Thank you. Dear students, now we are going to discuss about the concept of consumer's surplus. It's a very important concept in economics. This was originally formulated by Dupuit in 1844 but was refined and popularized by Alfred Marshall in his book Principles of Economics, published in 1890. Actually, what is consumer surplus? Consumer surplus is actually the difference between what a consumer is willing to pay for a commodity and what he actually pays for it. And in the words of Marshall, it is the excess of price which a man would be willing to pay rather than go without the thing over that which he actually does pay is the economic measure of this surplus satisfaction, and it is called consumer's surplus. Actually, the concept of consumer surplus was mainly given by Marshall, and it is based on the law of diminishing marginal utility, which we have already done. What is that? Law of diminishing marginal utility says that as we go on consuming more and more units of a commodity, its marginal utility goes on declining. So, when a consumer buys a commodity, he compares the price with the marginal utility. He will buy up to the point where price is equal to the marginal utility. So, the last unit of money which is bought by the consumer has the same marginal utility as its price, but the earlier units are giving him extra marginal utility. So, this extra marginal utility is actually the benefit to the consumer, and this is known as consumer's surplus. Now, this Marshallian concept of consumer surplus is based on the following assumptions. Number one is cardinal measurement of utility is possible. This says that utility can be measured cardinally in terms of numbers. We can say that first unit of the commodity is giving us utility worth 50 paisa or how many rupees, etc., and that is actually the cardinal measurement, and we can add that utility. Second is marginal utility of money is constant, because money has been taken as measuring rod of utility. We are measuring utility in terms of money. So, it was essential to assume that marginal utility of money remains constant, because anything which is a unit of measurement should have a constant value. So, that is why it was compulsorily assumed that marginal utility of money remains constant. Another assumption is that commodities are not interrelated in any manner. That means that commodities are independent of each other, and utility of a commodity depends only on that commodity. It does not depend upon any other commodity. There are no substitutes available for a commodity. It has been assumed that a commodity has no substitute. We want it and it cannot be substituted by any other commodity. So, that is also the assumption. And all other assumptions of the law of diminishing marginal utility are actually the assumptions of this law, just like the consumer is rational or goods are divisible, prices are known. So, all other assumptions which we take for law of diminishing marginal utility are actually also the assumptions of the consumer's surplus also. Now, we will see how we will measure consumer surplus with the help of marginal utility. In the table 1, in the first column, we have shown the number of units. They are from 1 to 5. In the second column, we have shown marginal utility. You see here that the first unit of money, first unit of commodity gives marginal utility worth rupees 50. And when you consume the second unit, marginal utility comes down to rupees 40. And when you consume the third unit, it is 30. So, it goes on declining. From the 4th unit it is 20 and from the 5th unit it is only 10. So, this marginal utility goes on declining, but the price is equal. Supposing the price of this commodity in the market is rupees 20. So, whether it is the first unit or second unit or third, fourth and fifth, price remains 20. So, you see here in the last column we have shown net marginal benefit. For the first unit, consumer is getting marginal utility worth rupees 50, but he has to pay price rupees 20. So, the net marginal benefit is 50 minus 20, 30. From the second unit, again he is getting the benefit of 20, 40 minus 20 is 20. Even from the third unit, he is getting marginal benefit of rupees 10, and in the fourth unit this net benefit is 0, and if he buys the fifth unit this will become minus 10. But actually consumer will buy 4 units where the price is equal to marginal utility. Now you can see from the 4 units what is the total utility? 50 plus 40 plus 30 plus 20, this is 140 rupees, and the price paid is 20 multiplied by 4 is 80 rupees. So, the consumer surplus is 140 minus 80 is equal to 60. Either you could add the net benefits 30 plus 20 plus 10 plus 0, then also it is 60, or you take the total utility minus the price paid, that is consumer's surplus. So, in this table we have shown that consumer surplus is rupees 60. You can take any example also. Supposing a person is very fond of watching cricket match. He is ready to pay rupees 1000 for a ticket for watching cricket. But actually he gets the ticket for rupees 700. So, this means 300 is his consumer's surplus. So, you can see what you are willing to pay and what you actually pay. The difference will tell you what is the consumer's surplus. This we can show in the figure also. In figure 1, we have taken price and marginal utility on y axis and commodity X is shown on x axis. From the first unit, consumer is getting marginal utility worth rupees 50. So, this rectangle shows you what you are willing to pay for unit 1. From the second unit, this is 40, and from the third unit this is 30, and from the fourth unit this is 20, and from the fifth unit it is 10, but the price is 20 per unit. So, you see that the area above the 20, this will be the consumer's surplus, because this is the net benefit consumer is getting. In the figure 2, we can show the consumer surplus, and again you see we have taken X commodity on X axis and Y commodity on price and marginal utility on Y axis. Price is equal to OP. Here DD1 is the demand curve and it is also the marginal utility curve. Now at price OP, we see that consumer will buy OM units of the commodity where the price is equal to OP or ME and marginal utility is also equal to ME. And for OM units, now the consumer is willing to give up OMED area. This is what he is willing to pay for commodity X up to units OM. But actual payment is OPEM. This is the price multiplied by the units of the commodity. So, what is left? the total area he is willing to pay is OMED and he is paying OMEP. So, the area DPE, which is a triangle, that is the consumer's surplus. So, you can say consumer surplus is measured as an area under the demand curve which is above the price of the commodity. So, area DP is the consumer's surplus. Now, we can say what happens when there is a change in price of the commodity. This is shown in figure 3. Price and marginal utility are shown on y axis and X commodity is shown on x axis. The DR is the demand curve. First price is OP and consumer is buying OM units of the commodity. Here you see that consumer is willing to pay OMED, but the actual payment is OPEM. So, triangle DPE is the consumer's surplus. Now, what happens if the price falls? Price falls to OP1. Now, the consumer will buy OM2 of the commodity because now the equilibrium is at E1. So, what happens in this case? You see, now he is willing to pay OM2 E1D, but the payment is OP1 E1 and M2. So, now the consumer surplus is DP1 E1. So, there is rise in the consumer surplus by the area P1 E and E1. So, what you see that as the price falls, consumer surplus increases, and if the price rises to OP2, now he is buying OM1 of the commodity, and now you see that your consumer surplus has decreased to DP2 E2, or decrease in consumer surplus is by the area P, E, E2 and P2. So, what you find that whenever there is fall in price of a commodity, consumer surplus will rise, and whenever there is rise in the price of a commodity, consumer's surplus will fall. Now, we will see what is the criticism against this Marshallian concept of consumer's surplus. Actually, because it is based on the law of diminishing marginal utility, so all the criticism which is there, which is mainly leveled against law of diminishing marginal utility. So, what are these main points? Some economists have pointed out that this concept is hypothetical, imaginary and illusory. How? Some economists say that consumer is ready to pay his limited money income. So, he wants to buy so many goods and he is willing to spend his limited money income, and when he goes to the market, he spends his money income on one good or the other. So, what he is willing to spend is actually spent in the market. So, in that sense, there is no consumer surplus left. Second is, quantitative measurement of utility is not possible. This measure was based on the measurement of utility in cardinal numbers, but we know utility is a subjective thing. It changes from person to person. It is not the same for all, and it is very difficult to measure this in terms of numbers. Then marginal utility of money is not constant. We have assumed here that marginal utility of money remains constant, but actually when a consumer goes on buying more and more units of a product, the money income with him goes on declining, and with fall in money income with him, marginal utility of money will rise, while we have taken here that marginal utility of money remains constant. Then consumer surplus from necessities is indefinite and unascertainable. You know, necessities are those commodities without which we cannot survive. If we are thirsty, then we are willing to give as much money as we have for a glass of water, because that is necessary for our life. In that case, the consumer surplus will be indefinite, and it will be very difficult to measure it. Then there is a non-availability of complete demand schedule of a commodity. We can find out the consumer surplus only if we know the demand schedule, if we know the demand curve, so that we can know what the consumer is willing to pay and what he has to actually pay in the market. But actually sometimes we don't know what is the exact demand schedule of a consumer, and if demand curve is not known, we cannot find out the consumer's surplus. Another criticism is that there is interdependence of the goods has been ignored, but you know, goods are interdependent. Goods are, you know, one commodity sometimes is of no use without the other. Car is of no use if there is no petrol. Blackboard is of no use if there is no chalk, and even the substitutes are affecting the demand for a commodity. So it is wrong to assume that goods are independent. Then economic position of different consumer is different. Some persons are rich, some persons are poor. So rich people are willing to pay a high price for a commodity, and for the same commodity a poor person is willing to pay less. So consumer surplus will be different for different persons. It will not be the same for all. Then even if supposing two persons have the same income, but their habits and tastes can also change. So if their habits and tastes are different, they will be willing to pay a different price for a commodity because of changes in the tastes and preferences of the consumer. In that case again, consumer surplus will be different for different people, or even they are having the same income, consumer surplus will not be same. So this measurement was with the help of law of diminishing marginality. Now we will come to how it can be measured with the indifference curve analysis. Hicks measured consumer surplus by the use of indifference curves, and this is shown in figure 4. Here we have taken X commodity on X axis and money income on Y axis. Now supposing the consumer does not know the price, and IC1 is the first indifference curve which is touching Y axis at L. This shows he has OL of the money income, and he is at point E, which shows what he is willing to pay. At point E, consumer is willing to buy OR of the commodity, and for that he is willing to give up LF, unit of money income. And when he goes to the market, he finds that the price line is LM, because he comes to know that the price is OL upon OM, and now he can go on the higher indifference curve IC2, and equilibrium is at E1. So now he is paying LG units of money for OR units of the commodity. He was willing to give up LF, but actually he has to pay only LG units of money. So GF is the consumer's surplus. So this is the measurement of consumer surplus with the help of indifference curves. So here also you can think that if the price falls, then naturally LM line will shift to the right and we will be moving on the higher indifference curves and the consumer surplus will be rising. And if the price rises, this LM price line will shift to the left and you will see that the consumer surplus will fall. So here we have seen how indifference curve analysis can also help in measuring the consumer's surplus. Now we will see what is the importance of the concept of consumer's surplus. Number one is it helps in comparing conditions in different countries. You know, we say that some countries are developed, some are underdeveloped, and that is possible to say on the basis of consumer surplus also. You know, in advanced countries, people are getting the infrastructure or the essential commodities like water, electricity and other things at quite cheaper rates. So their consumer surplus is very high, and in developing economies or underdeveloped economies, necessities are not so cheap or they are not provided by the government at low rates. So that is why you can see that in that case people as well as people are also willing to pay less because of their less incomes. So you can say that because of the non-availability of the goods in underdeveloped economies, their consumer surplus is less, or if the prices in one countries are lower, then also the consumer surplus will be more in that country. So we can compare the economic condition of the country. Then it is very important for a monopolist. He can charge different prices from different customers. He can see what is the price a person is willing to pay for a commodity, and he can charge the same and extract the consumer's surplus. You know, he can charge even different prices for different units. He can charge the highest price for the first commodity, then less price for the second, and this he can charge different prices according to what the consumer is willing to pay, and no consumer surplus will be left for the consumer. This is known as the price discrimination of the first degree. It is important for the finance minister. You know, finance minister has to take decision regarding the imposition of taxes and giving of subsidies. You know, whenever the tax is imposed, you know, the price of the commodity rises, and we have seen here that as the price of the commodity rises, consumer surplus decreases. With the imposition of taxes, government will get revenue, but it is the duty of the finance minister to compare what is the increase in government's revenue and what is the fall in consumers' surplus, and he must see that increase in government revenue must be greater than the fall in consumers' surplus. Then only it will be beneficial to impose the taxes. In the similar way, when subsidies are to be given, naturally this will reduce the prices of the commodities and consumer surplus will be increased, but the government will be losing revenue. So we have to see again that loss of the government should be less than the increase in consumers surplus, then only it is beneficial to give the subsidies. It also helps in estimating gains from international trade. You know, international trade takes place that we import commodities from the foreign countries only if they are cheaper as compared to what we can get in our own country. So when we get the commodities at cheaper rates, and you have seen that as the price falls, consumer surplus increases. So welfare of the people will definitely increase if we get imports from other countries at cheaper rates. So consumer surplus advocates for free international trade. This concept also helps in estimating the impacts of tariffs. You know, students, sometimes tariffs are imposed on the imports when we want to reduce our imports. We want to protect our home industries and we put duties on the imports. Again, by putting the duties on imports, what would happen? Prices of the imported good will increase and this would result in fall in consumers' surplus. So, we must evaluate what is the fall in consumer surplus and how it is distributed, what part of it is going to the government as revenue, what part of it is going to the producers as producer surplus, but some part of the fall in consumer surplus is still left. So, we will see that import tariffs generally reduce the consumers' welfare because it creates burden on the consumers in the form of rise in price, as well as we see that demand will fall. So, this way you see that the concept of consumer surplus is very, very important for telling us whether a policy should be made or not. And whenever any project is started by the government must see what will be the increase in consumer surplus or what will be the loss to the other party, and naturally we have to compare, and whether it is loss for the consumer or loss for the producer or for the government, it must be always there that welfare or gain should always be greater than the fall, then only the policy is going to be successful. Thank you.
With this note, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much for giving us a very, very vivacious session where we tried to understand about breakup of price effect into income effect and substitution effect, as well as on consumer surplus. We had a very, very good session today. So, dear friends, if you have your feedback which you like to share with us, then you can mail us at info.cc@nic.in, and if you have any kind of questions also, then also you can post us so that we can find the answers of your questions the next time when Dr. Kamlesh Gakkar visits our studio. And for you, we have uploaded lectures on YouTube pertaining to microeconomics. This lecture would also be uploaded on YouTube very soon. We would be meeting again tomorrow. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much.